We are just starting off with this new webinar series, which is called Gorilla Features, and we want to introduce Gorilla functionality to you. So we want to give you a good overview of what is possible. And the topic for today's webinar is randomization. And that's actually personally one of my favorite topics. So I'm already going to enjoy the webinar. We are going to talk about what is possible in terms of randomization within Gorilla, what options you have in questionnaires, in behavioral tasks, and then what options you have in terms of randomizing participants to different groups. For example, if you have a control and a treatment group. Now, to start with, we're going to cover a few basics of Gorilla. First of all, because we might have a few people who are completely new to Gorilla, I'll just briefly explain what we are, what we do. And after that, we will jump straight into the webinar and look at, first of all, from a conceptual level, what is randomization? What do we actually mean by that? Why is it important? And then we'll have a look at how you can do randomization within Gorilla. So to get started, I'm just going to start my presentation, and we're first going to have a look at what Gorilla is and what it does. So Gorilla is this all-in-one platform, powerful and easy to use, that allows researchers to create surveys. For example, it has feature parity with Qualtrics, and then we also have a task building tool, which would be similar to something like ePrime. You can also create experiments in MATLAB that are similar to that. You can then construct experiment flows which allow you to go from surveys to these tasks into, for example, a randomizer, which randomizes you to different conditions onto further tasks, which can be presented in a counterbalanced order. I've got a little diagram of how that could look like on the right-hand side here, where you can see participants will first go through a survey, then through a task, and then do something else. So four different groups of participants, they're being randomized in those different groups. And then we have these advanced tools like a game builder, a multiplayer tool, a shot builder tool, and a UX UI tool as well. And because I said randomizing, I'm so glad so many people are interested in randomization as well. This is obviously, as I said, the topic of our session today. So we're now going to have a look at what is randomization, what do we actually mean by the word, and are there maybe other words? And you can probably sense from what I'm saying, there are other words as well. Not to get confused with all of that, we're going to cover the definitions of those words. So let me move on. Randomization, or do we actually say counterbalancing? Now, that is a very good question. In psychology in general, randomization, that just means we are allocating participants to different groups randomly. So it refers to, in general, when you say randomization, it refers to a between participants design. You might have one group of participants doing one thing and a second group of participants doing another thing. And then you've got the word counterbalancing, which in, again, psychology in general would mean controlling for order effects. So that applies specifically to repeated measures design, where you're testing several different trials over and over again, but you want to make sure that there is no effect of the order within the conditions you're presenting to participants. So a good example of that is a Stroop task where you've got congruent and incongruent conditions. You want to make sure that participants get those conditions in a random order. So that would be, in this case, counterbalancing. Now, what we do in Gorilla is that we actually call all of that, all of which I have just explained, we call that randomization. And it applies to really any order of stimuli presentation. So that could be between participants, that could be within participants, that could be within the spreadsheet you're using, in the tasks, or in items in your questionnaire. So just to let you know, from now on, I'm just going to use the term randomization for basically everything we do in Gorilla, but this mainly refers to actually what in psychology we call counterbalancing. just to avoid confusion, I will explain the exact context each time so that you actually know, okay, this is the type of counterbalancing we're doing at the moment. It's just called in Gorilla randomization, but that doesn't matter. Okay, next then, why should we actually randomize? Randomization is really important. I think most of us actually know that, but sometimes we wonder, okay, why is that actually the case? Now, the first reason for that is that we want to avoid any order effects. Sometimes in specific designs, participants actually get tired when they take part in our tasks because we have those endless repeated measures designs where participants have to go through 200, 300 more trials. And then we want to make sure that there's no effect of fatigue that we see in our reaction time data. The same applies to practice. In a few tasks, actually you can see a learning curve from participants. They're getting better at the task. We also want to make sure that practice doesn't have an effect on the variables we're actually testing. And then, that's what this image on the slide refers to. We've got primacy and recency effects, which we can see in memory tasks, for example, where we remember items we've seen at the beginning of the task and items we've seen at the end of the task, but everything in the middle, we're not so good at memorizing that content. So again, this would be an effect of order we can see, and we want to make sure that that is not the case, and therefore we want to randomize between different conditions. We also want to improve the validity of our studies so that the results we're observing in our data are not due to, are just due to the independent variable, but not the order of those conditions. And then finally, we want to enhance experimental control so that we can ensure that all possible sequences that our stimuli could come in are accounted for in the data analysis stage. Now, what that looks like in Gorilla is that we have various randomization options. From a very general perspective, we could think of them in terms of complete randomization, partial randomization, and then we've got all the details, which I'm going to cover in more detail a bit later. In terms of the complete randomization, that would mean that we have different permutations for the task order, and we want to make sure that we cover all the different permutations. You could imagine that we have a condition or a first task A, second task B, a third task C. We want to make sure that those three tasks get shown to participants, but we want to randomize the order. So how we could go about that is to have a 3 times 2 times 1. So that would be some participants start with the task A, some participants start with task B, and we cover all the different permutations of the order of those tasks. That is definitely possible if your number of tasks is quite low, so if there aren't many different permutations. But once we get into a very high number of conditions, that gets slightly out of hand because there will be loads n factorial numbers of permutations we can have. In which case, we often use what we call a Latin square design. So the Latin square design is used when we have a limited or a higher number of permutations, and we want to limit that number. We only want to select specific orders of the all possible orders to use. Now, that is the theory behind that, and we're going to have a look at a Latin square design a bit later in the webinar. But then we also have everything that happens in between, all the details about that. So what we can randomize in Gorilla, that could be different blocks within our task, that could be specific trials, that could be stimuli that we want to randomize independently from others. So we can randomize, for example, one image, but not the other. The other should be always static. We can choose just a selection of possible trials, so we can have a whole spreadsheet of possible images for our trials to use, and then we want to make sure that we only use, for example, half of them. And then we can also assign stimuli with a given probability. So if you have a probability of triggering a correct answer, for example, or an incorrect answer, we can do that as well with randomization. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the different randomization components. These are specific to our task builder, but we're going to have a look at those one by one and see what exactly those randomization components do and how you can use them for your task. So in the chat, just as a little exercise, if you find randomization difficult, feel free to put that in the chat. I find it difficult. If you find it easy, feel free to put that as well. But what I'm most interested in is if you have any specific questions, basically, what made you come to the webinar today? What would you like to know about randomization that you don't know at the moment? If you have anything like that, feel free to drop that in the chat now. I will stop the presentation for now, and we will go into Gorilla actually, and we will have a look at our Gorilla homepage, and then we will start looking at randomization in questionnaires specifically. So if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, feel free to do that. If you don't, we're just going to move on to the next part and have a look at the randomization within questionnaires. Just going to have a look at the chat. Doesn't seem to be anything. That's fine. We're just going to continue. You just put something. Learn more about when to use the different variations of randomization that's best for my experiment. That is perfect. Hugh, we're going to do exactly that. As I'm going to show you all the different randomization components, we're going to consider exactly what can be used for which type of experiment, learning a bit more about a between participants design or a within participants design, and how you make sure that everything you want to randomize is actually randomized. And we've got Zohara about randomization between columns, several sets of questions I want to randomize, which set we will be showing. Yeah, that's also going to be covered. We'll have a look at that when you want to, for example, randomize the position of images on the screen, or the content that is drawn in for those images. Okay, bear with me. This sounds more like randomization in Gorilla tasks. We will first have a look at questionnaires and the things you can randomize in questionnaires. But after that, we'll move on to the task and consider all those specific or more specific questions about the task randomization. So you should be able to see my Gorilla screen now. We're going to start with a questionnaire, which I've got in my project folder here. So in this questionnaire, just to show you what we're doing, this is an autism spectrum quotient. So we just have a little consent form at the beginning, and after that, we've got this rating scale with different questions on it, and participants just have to select one of the options for each question. You can see we've got page 2 and page 3. The format is exactly the same for those questions. We just have statements, and participants have to choose one answer option for each of those statements. In terms of randomization, what we can do in questionnaires is that on this first page, we've got a dropdown which we're using to ask participants for their consent. You can see that this was set up with the dropdown questionnaire component. And in the settings, you can see that we've got this randomized order setting. Now, the randomized order setting in questionnaires allows you to randomize the order of the answer options and how they come up for participants. If I was going to show this to you, I can see that, for example, at the moment, I've got I consent as the top choice, and below that, I've got I do not consent. I don't consent. So they always come up in the same order. If I wanted to make sure that those are randomized, each participant would receive a different order, or in a randomized way, the order. Then in the object, in the drop-down settings, what I can do is I can toggle that on to allow the order to be randomized. And in that case, this would come up for each participant in a randomized order. Here you can see we now got the I don't consent at the top, actually, instead of the I consent. So that is the first bit of randomization we can apply to questionnaires. On a second level, what we can randomize is the different items we can see on the page. So here on this page, you can see that all our items are in exactly the order they come up in the Objects tab. So we've got our first text item here. that should obviously always stay on top because it's our task instructions. And after that, we've got the different rating scales. If I go through them, you can see how that moves down the page. Now, to randomize the order of those questionnaire items, what we can do is go to the Screen tab, and in the Screen tab, we can make sure to randomize those questions. And we can then also make exceptions. So because I only want to randomize the actual statements and not the text above, I want to make an exception for the text. So once I've made the exception, I can then click on play, and each time I click on this, you can see we've got a different permutation, a different order of the questions that we are shown. For example, I go with that question first, but our text always stays on top of the screen exactly as we wanted it. So then, if we go to pages now, we can also randomize the page order. So that means we can say page 2 and page 3, where we've got our questions, we want to make sure that those come up in randomized order to each participant. To do that, we can again toggle this on, and then also make an exception, because at the beginning, we still want to do our consent form, and that should be the very first page. So we can here again make an exception for the first page, that should stay here, and then we only randomize page 2 and page 3 of our questionnaire. So once we've set that up, we can test that by just previewing the entire questionnaire, but I can guarantee now that this will apply the randomization to our pages. And as we've set the randomization to the items on the page here, that will randomize those questions as well. And then remember, on the first page, we also randomize the drop-down options within this drop-down component. So those will also be randomized. Now, this is it for the randomization you can apply in questionnaires. Let's go to the more difficult or more complex randomization, which we can find in behavioral tasks. We're going to have a look at this task I created. It's a very simple task made in Gorilla. You've got an instructions display, a task display, a break, and an end screen. And if we now go to our spreadsheet, I'll just briefly explain how the task works. So in our instructions, we're just giving participants the instructions of what they will be doing in the task. And in the task itself, we are showing them 2 images, and they have to select one of them. So they're just being asked to select their favorite food or what they prefer between the 2 food items. In our spreadsheet, we have stored the food images, which we want to use, and we have also stored some additional information about that trial. So in the difficulty column, for example, you can see whether this was considered an easy trial or whether this was considered a difficult trial. The display time column refers to the display of the fixation cross, which we can see we've got on screen 1 here. And this fixation cross, you can see this is linked to the spreadsheet column display time. So depending on the trial we are on, we're starting off with quite a short display time, 200 milliseconds, and we're going up to 1,400 milliseconds, so a bit longer. So at the moment, our first trial, a short display, then we've got our 2 images, and this is considered an easy trial. This is everything we have. We haven't applied any randomization whatsoever to our task. So the way that would work in Gorilla is that Gorilla goes in chronological order through the display column. So first we'll see our instructions, then we'll see the first task trial, second task trial, third task trial, fourth task trial, and after that we're going to have a break for participants. And then we'll continue just the way down to the end of the end of this task, and at the end they're just going to see some debrief information from the task. Just to give you an idea what that looks like at the moment without any randomization, we've got the instructions here, and then participants can see the 2 images after having seen the fixation cross. So I can choose one of those, fixation cross again, and then we've got another item here. I'm just going to choose between them. We've got 12 trials in total, and after 4 trials, we've got this break screen. So participants can decide whenever they want to continue. Now, we're going to have a look at the different types of randomization we can implement with exactly this task. First of all, what we want to do, and you can see I've already got a column for that, which I've created in my spreadsheet. We want to randomize different blocks. At the moment, we consider the the 4 first trials to be our block 1. And these trials are block 2, and these trials are our block 3. We want to make sure to randomize those blocks of trials, but the trial order within those blocks should stay the same. So the way we do that is we add a randomization component on the right-hand side here, and then we choose the randomized blocks component. Randomized blocks means it takes wherever the column is, in our case, this is the blocks column, everything that has the same number in it, or that could be a letter or any really the same type of information, those will be considered as one block. So now, if I preview that randomization, if I click on the little dice icon, which you can see next to randomization here, this is where I can test this. And now you can see, okay, we've got block 3 first, and after that we've got block 1, and after that we've got block 2. So each time we click on this dice icon, we can see a different permutation. So that would be applied to a different participant. Each time we click, it varies. Sometimes it doesn't, that's just by chance, because we've actually chosen the same permutation. So at the moment, our cucumber and carrot, which is the first trial of the second block, this is always going to stay on top of that block. So we're not actually changing the order of those trials within the block. You can see now that block 2 is in second position, we still have the cucumber and the carrot coming up as the first items on that block. So that's all fine. But what we want to do in addition to that, we also want to randomize the trials within those blocks. So we want to make sure that within block 3, everything appears in a randomized order as well. To do that, we just add another component to the task and we choose the randomized trials component. For the randomized trials, we are selecting exactly the same column. We're taking the blocks column. And what that does for the randomizing trials is it takes all the same numbers within that column and randomizes those as entire rows. So to see how that works, just remember that in block 3 at the moment, we've got fennel first, we've got feta second. So if we click on the different permutation here, you can see we don't have fennel first, we've got feta first now, and we've got fennel second. If I click again, you can see because the block has now moved, we've got fennel, feta again. If I do that again, it's just by chance giving me the same order for those. Yeah, now you can see we've got feta first and fennel is actually the last trial in that block. So this way you can combine several different randomization options just in one go. Now, after having done the randomized blocks and the randomized trials, this is the most basic randomization we can apply, and that applies to a lot of different experimental designs. But what about the positioning of our images? At the moment, we always have the banana on the left-hand side and the apple on the right-hand side. That is because we've got the banana, which will be linked here in the left column, which is called image 1, and the apple, which is in the column on the right-hand side, so in the image 2 column. And that is because this one is linked to image 1, and this one is linked to image 2. So we don't actually change the positioning of those images. But in quite a few experimental designs, we want to make sure that those images could also appear on the opposite side of the screen. So to do that, this is what Zohara, I think, was pointing at. We want to randomize between the columns. So we want to make sure that banana could also be on the other side and apple could also be in the image 1 column. To do that, we just add another component here and we choose the randomize within column. So randomize between columns. Now I'm getting confused already. Randomize between columns means that we are taking image 1 column and image 2 column, and within the same row, we could randomly allocate either banana here or apple. So we're telling it exactly, take the column image 1 and take the column image 2. And within the same row, choose either of those to go into image 1 and the other one to go into image 2. Again, we can preview that and we can have a look. Probably best if we decide on an item which we want to follow. Okay, say we've got spinach and fennel, which is part of block 3. If I click on that again, I can see spinach is still on the left, fennel still on the right. Let's see if I can change it. Spinach and fennel. No, it doesn't want to change spinach and fennel. Spinach and fennel, and it's really staying there at the moment. And now we go. There we've got fennel and spinach. So they've actually changed their position now. And that is really just pure chance because we are randomly allocating the positioning of either image 1 or image 2 within either of those columns we've set. So sometimes this doesn't apply to the preview we've got here, but once we preview the entire task, you can also test each time you would get a random allocation of those stimuli. Now, after randomizing between the columns, we want to also randomize within a column. And where that makes sense is that at the moment, we've got this display time, and we have allocated the display time, but it moves automatically with our rows. Now, what we could do is move the display time independently from the rest of the rows. So that at the moment gets shuffled because we're randomizing the trials within a block. To avoid that from happening and to be able to distribute all those values across all the different trials we've got, what we can do is add another component and use the randomize within column component. This randomize within column, again, we just need to choose the column we want to randomize within. It takes all the positions where we actually have a value and randomizes those values independently from all the other information in our spreadsheet. So I'm just going to choose the display time one. And now you can see at the moment, this 700 would always be with cabbage and kiwi. If I click on that again and we go to the 700s, you can see this is now with carrot and cucumber instead. So it is detached from the other randomization I'm generally applying to the rest of my spreadsheet or to the entire rows of my spreadsheet. Now, at the moment, you can see we're getting quite a few blocks and trials and randomizing between columns and within columns. You can add as many of the components we have available as you wish, but every component can only appear once in your spreadsheet. So if you're randomizing blocks, that would only be once. If you're randomizing between columns, again, that could only be once, with the exception that we also can randomize between multiple columns. So if that's what you want to do, for example, if you have 4 images, but you only want to randomize image 1 and image 2 together, and image 3 and image 4 together, then you can use that randomize within columns multi to set up multiple parents of columns you want to randomize. Just one more thing here on the randomization components. At the moment, we've got quite a lot of trials in our spreadsheet. So I'm going to delete a few components and I'm going to show you something different. I'm just going to take them out because it will be easier to understand and to not lose oversight of what we've done so far. In terms of the randomization components, it's actually important that you respect an order as well, because everything at the top of your randomization list gets randomized first, and everything after that will happen after the first randomization. So in terms of blocks and trials, we usually randomize the blocks first and the trials after that within the blocks. Sometimes you need another order, and in that case, you can just add those components in the order you would need them. For now, I'm going to delete this component as well, and I'm going to add a different component, which is called select randomized subset. And this does exactly what it says on the tin. We choose a column, and in that column, we say a specific value we're looking for, and then we can decide how many trials of that value I actually want to choose. For example, I want to do that based on difficulty. You can see at the moment, we've got 2 difficult and 2 easy trials per block. So that is 6 of them in total, 6 difficult trials and 6 easy trials in total. Say we wanted to choose 2 difficult trials and 4 easy trials. We can do that by just using the difficulty column. The value here would be difficult. So I'll put in the value, which we're using within the column, and then I can specify the number to use. So for example, I can say I want 2 of that, and I then want, again, the difficulty column, and the value should now be easy, and I want 4 of those. So once I've done that, I can then play the randomization, and you can see, because we haven't actually taken into account the breaks, this now messes up our spreadsheet. We might want to take them out. But just in general, you can see we've got 4 of the easy trials and 2 of the difficult trials, which get added to our spreadsheet. And each time we click, those are different trials. So we've got 4 easy ones, 2 difficult ones, but they're not always the same. So they're being drawn from the total amount of trials we've got available in our spreadsheet. I'm going to stop that randomization and actually stop that and go back to our initial spreadsheet we had here. I'm also going to remove this randomization component. So I think there's only 2 components left, which I didn't cover today. I'll not go in much detail about those components, but what we have here is, first of all, the random assignment per trial, where this applies to a situation which I talked about earlier in the webinar, where we can, for example, base that on probability. So we can say that in 50% of cases, this should be a correct answer. In 50% of cases, that should be the correct answer. So that would be a case, a use case for the random assignment per trial. We can also base randomization on public IDs, which we have from participants, and in that case, we can choose a different spreadsheet. Now, that leads me perfectly to the next topic I want to talk about, because we've created one spreadsheet here, but in a few different experimental designs, we actually want to do a between participants design, where some participants go through the stimuli we've got listed here, and other participants go through another set of stimuli. In that case, what we can do is we can just create a new spreadsheet with a new list of stimuli, but still using the same task, because our task structure, what we've created in our displays, will always be the same. I have created 2 spreadsheets here. I've got spreadsheet 1 and I've got spreadsheet 2. Now, spreadsheet 2 is completely empty. There's actually not much information in that spreadsheet. It just takes the general display format and doesn't give any information about image 1 and image 2, for example. This is just for demonstration purposes. We're going to have a look now at the experiment tree level and how you can make sure that you randomly allocate participants to either of those 2 spreadsheets, and to show you the different randomization options we've got available in the experiment builder as well. Let's head over to the experiment in that case. So we're going to go back to our projects folder and we're going to look at the experiment. Now, I've created a first draft here of what our experiment looks like. We've got a start and a finish node at the bottom, and then we've got one task here. This is the bar task, a high cost block, and then we've got a low cost block. So this is specifically a between participants design where one of our groups will go to this task and one of our and the other group will go to the second task. To do that in Gorilla, what we need to add here is what we call a randomizer node. The randomizer node lets us decide on 2 groups or more if we want to, and lets us decide on the ratio as well. So the ratio would mean that every other participant goes to group 1, next participant would go to group 2. You can also make that 2 and 2 or 1 and 2, in which case the ratio would be slightly balanced, towards group 2, so that you have more participants actually ending up in group 2. So in this case, we are just keeping it balanced. You can see we also have this randomization mode, which I talked about previously. Balanced is completely fine. True randomization would be random, in which case we have a 50% chance, but you might end up with all participants going to one task if really you have bad luck or luck, whatever it is. In that case, we are going to use balance to make sure that participants get pseudo-randomized into those groups, and we assure that the groups are about of similar size. I'm going to add this node, and I'm going to put that here below our start node, and then disconnect this and connect this to go to the randomizer. So participants will come in from the start of our experiment, then go into the randomizer, and then the group 1 will go to the high cost block, and the group 2 will go to the low cost block. And then we can make both groups go back to our finish node. Now, this is a typical, very typical between participants design. We've got 2 different groups that could be control and treatment. They're doing slightly different tasks. In this case, we actually have a task that was created differently compared to a task where we're just using a different spreadsheet. But that would also be a possibility, to use a different spreadsheet. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We can add a new node here, and we're just going to add the task node from the task I just created. Let me just go back and make sure I've actually saved the latest changes of that task to make sure we can. No, I haven't. For randomization, I'm going to save this now. I'm going to go back to my experiment so that we can add our task here. I'm going to add that other node task. We're going to choose our food task here. Once I've added the food task, I can put that in here, and we don't need the bar task anymore, so I'm just going to remove this one. Once I've removed it, I'm going to replace this with the arrow that goes from the randomizer node and then back to the finish node. For the second task, also, I don't want to use the bar task here, so I'm going to remove that, take that off, and instead I want to just duplicate this task I've got here. Now that I've duplicated it, I can make group 2 go to that task and then back to the finish node. Now, how do I choose the different spreadsheets? The different spreadsheets are within my task. So I just need to click on this task node here, and I need to choose the spreadsheet which comes up in spreadsheets to use. You can see we've got spreadsheet 1 and spreadsheet 2. So for the first task, we're going to use spreadsheet 1. But for the second task, we're going to use spreadsheet 2. So here we're going to choose that spreadsheet, and remember the spreadsheet is empty at the moment, so that won't do anything good for our experiment. But just for the demonstration, here you can see this now uses spreadsheet 1. This is the same task, but we're using spreadsheet 2. So this way you can design this between participants experiment design. Now, there's one thing which I wanted to mention as well in the experiment tree, that is the order node. So you could think that participants actually have to do several different tasks, and that could be that they have to first do the task with spreadsheet 1, and after that do the task with spreadsheet 2. So I'm going to just duplicate this task again and put a second instance of that task below this first one. So instead of the participant, it doesn't want to, there we go. No, it's still on it. This is just following my mouse at the moment. I might have to, no, I can't even move away. Okay, we're just going to go back. We'll create just a new experiment. There we go. That works now. I'm just going to cancel this one and make this go to our second task here. Once I've done that, at the moment you can see this still uses spreadsheet 1. But if I wanted to use spreadsheet 2 instead, I would just go to the setting again and use spreadsheet 2 and then save the settings. After that, participants should then go to the finish node. I'm going to get rid of the randomizer. I will no longer actually need this node, so I'm going to as well remove the randomizer node, don't need it, and then participants will just go in here from the start and go to the two-way forced choice. After that, I don't need this task anymore. I'm going to remove that as well. There we go. And now participants are doing spreadsheet 1 in the same task first, and after that they're doing spreadsheet 2. But this is exactly where we would observe any order effects, because participants are doing this first and this second. They might be tired by the second time. They might have learning effects, any of those. So we want to make sure that the order of those tasks is randomized for each participant. In Gorilla, we do that by using the order node. The order node can be found within our experiment tree nodes. It's this one here. And again, we're using here the Latin square design, which I talked to you about before. The order node needs to be connected to both of our task nodes. So we need to make sure that this connects to this, and it also connects to this. Now that we've done that, these two tasks will come up in randomized order for each participant. So sometimes they might get this spreadsheet first, and sometimes they might get the second spreadsheet first, but that will always be randomized. The data is obviously stored in your data file, so you know exactly which condition or which spreadsheet or which task participants saw before seeing another one. Now, because I was talking about different spreadsheets and we still have those different spreadsheets, we've got another option of using different spreadsheets, and that is to use what we call a counterbalance node. A counterbalance node would allow us to not have separate branches for our different spreadsheets as we did before with the randomizer node, but we could enter the values of the spreadsheets to use into the values here, and then it would automatically choose one of those spreadsheet values for any given participant. Okay, this was it for the randomization at the experiment tree level. We're now going to have a quick look at the last bits of my slides for today, but then I hope we can have a bit of a discussion, and I also have a little quiz about all the randomization information we talked about today. So we're going to have a look at that. Let me just get back to my slides, but in the meantime, feel free, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat already, and we might have someone answering those, or we can come back to those. Start the presentation again. We did all of that. If you are new to Gorilla and you're interested in finding out more, then you can sign up for free. It's completely free to get a Gorilla account, play around with all the randomization and all the other components you can find. You can watch our onboarding webinar if you're interested in it. In the onboarding webinar, we explain what I just briefly touched upon today about the spreadsheet, for example, how that works, how you can build a questionnaire, how you can build a task, and how you then put those together into an experiment to create the study flow for participants. And then if you have any specific questions, feel free to get in touch with us. Our support team is always there to help you with your queries if you get stuck, or if it's even more a conceptual question, we're more than happy to help you with that, anything randomization related or anything else really. In terms of the next webinars, I just wanted to make a little announcement about that as well. We are going to continue our Gorilla Present series, which is with researchers that have used Gorilla, where they present what they've done and we give a little introduction. So the next one for that one is going to be with Emma Meyer, and Emma Meyer is going to present an app simulation which she created to study sustainability and environmental friendly choices for travel. That sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to that myself. That's going to be in March. And then we've got the Gorilla feature webinars, which we're going to do more of as well. But do let us know if you like this format, if you'd like to learn more about Gorilla functionality. We've got a little feedback survey at the end where you can let us know if you have any topics you would like to cover as well. Do let us know. The next one for the Gorilla features is going to be about the binding, which again, we had a quick look at today, and the store, so how you can save responses from participants and make use of them later in your experiment.